day. So I'm really excited. Again, I'm Kelly Ireland. I'm the CEO and Chief Technology Officer for CBT. I've been in tech for 40 years, and I've spent the last 5 years leading CBT and gaining knowledge and experience as what most people are calling a boutique system integrator and a domain expert integrator specializing in OT-IT convergence and the IoT and edge technologies. So Dr. Tom, do you want me to go ahead with the panel?
Please do. You take over from here. And let me just thank the panel for joining as well. I appreciate you guys. Venkat, Chad, and Bobby, and I know you're going to be entertaining and informing. So thanks again.
Thanks, Dr. Tom. So today we're going to be talking about one of the transformations within digital transformation, Industry 4.0, directly related to IoT and edge. Many of us have had a decade or more of being in IT and the data center, from cloud to high performance computing to the maturity of management practices. The transformation that we've seen in the last several years is distinctly shifted as everything data center to a much greater focus on the edge and IoT. And as we've watched this shift develop, suppliers have had to continue supporting the data center while still looking to augment the edge. It's become extremely important. I'm honored to be able to host this esteemed panel who will share their and their company's experiences in addressing the changes and adjustments that we've made or they've made to their products, their services, their go-to-market approach to accommodate the many challenges at the edge not seen in the data center. And I can tell you from our experience, there are so many more challenges at the edge than most people even realize. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Bobby. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kelly, I'm going to have to ask you to introduce me more often. This was great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Listen, I'm thrilled to be here with Kelly, with Chad, with Venkat. Kelly was able to step in to help lead this panel last minute. My name is Bobby Shkolnikov. I'm a Principal Business Development Executive focusing on the global IoT strategy and commercialization at SaaS. My focus is on building robust ecosystems of partners to co-create and co-sell solutions. And I tend to spend the bulk of my time in the connected quality space as well as the digital logistics space, both in the industrial and life sciences verticals. And then prior to joining SaaS, I spent the majority of my career as a management consultant, where I work with clients to bring that transparency, that agility, and enabling that holistic decision-making in their industrial IoT and supply chain networks. I received my MBA from Duke's Fuqua School of Business, which is what brought me to Durham, North Carolina. And then prior to that, I did my undergrad at Virginia Tech. So thank you again. And listen, I'm thrilled to be here, excited about the discussion we've got coming up with the team. So thank you very much for joining, folks. And we hope, as Dr. Tom mentioned, this will be both relevant to your work and interest as well, or heck, at least entertaining.
Thank you, Bobby. Chad.
Hey, thank you again for inviting me to this. This is super exciting to me because this is a space I've been working in a long time. So I'm currently at Red Hat, but a year ago, I actually was working at ExxonMobil for 10 years doing pretty much exactly what we're talking about here as a customer. And before that, I did 15 years in retail. So this is a space that I've seen. And it's funny, we call it now Industry 4.0 or IoT, but a lot of these things, like when we're talking data center and edge and near edge and far edge, this has existed a long time in a lot of these industries, and people that we have a cool new name for it, but now we're actually have the technology to do really, really cool stuff with it. So I don't know, I'm excited to see where this goes and talk about it. But again, yeah, thank you, and excited to work with you guys on this.
Thank you, Chad. And Venkat, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly because we haven't had a chance to talk, but please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for having me here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I guess I'm the only engineering guy here, pure engineering, product guy. So I'm a VP engineering at Zebra, responsible for building some of the smart services to complement the device evolution that's happening out there. In the past 25 or so years of my product career, I worked on both sides of the equation, worked on the devices, some connected, some unconnected, and then worked on the software related to the real-time stream processing, complex event processing, data management, and various facets of it. So really excited to see how these two sort of come together in terms of creating this new value, right? And in an ever-changing space that we are in. So really excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think the crowd will see that we have a lot of expertise here. So let's jump right into the first topic. What specific customer needs and gaps did your company observe as they sought to begin to serve the emerging edge IoT marketplace? Let's go ahead. Venkat, we'll start with you.
All right. So let's just jump right in. As a company, we operate across different verticals, right? Retail, manufacturing, healthcare, and transportation, and so on. Although the technology evolution has been the same, right, in terms of the device capabilities and what's happening on the network and network speeds, and right, our challenges around the data centers, right, whether they are far or near. I think the real value is in how we are actually applying these technologies to each of the situations, right? What's happening on a specific scenario with with the retail worker versus somebody is in transportation, right? Who's on the road and in terms of which data center they connect to, right? Is very different. See, in that evolution, again, it's more about how we bring these technologies to a particular vertical use. I have a fun example that in fact we play a big role in, that where actually both the near edge as well as far edge play a big role. I'm not sure whether you guys are familiar. There is a NFL. On NFL, we basically do player tracking. So there are RFID tags attached to each of the players' shoulder pads, as well as for the football itself, right? And there is a lot of data collection, data processing, the GPS analytics and all happen right within the stadium, right? It's basically as close to the edge, right? Because that's where you need a lot of calibration of the data. There are different algorithms and so on, but all that is actually complemented with the player stats and so on. That's actually living elsewhere, right? That integrated experience, right, is actually fueling how a coach could actually, change the game or change the place, right, as we go along, right? And how these analytics are actually helping commentators and broadcasting and rest of the ecosystem that's involved. So it's really critical in terms of how the technology comes together to actually solve the use case. So that's where I would see it's not so much about only the technologies, but how well we bring them together.
Beck, I love the example from the NFL. It is absolutely frightening to see just how big some of these athletes are and how fast they move, and just the force of the collisions that happens in the game. I wanted to touch on, kind of expand on this a little bit, just touch on the specific topic of how the technology stack is going physical. And what I mean by that is that IT leaders have one more important emerging category of technology infrastructure to manage, and that's physical assets. So the reach of IoTs has expanded, far beyond the realm of those digital-only solutions and technologies. So these CIOs, it won't be enough to ensure that the digital systems are properly implemented, integrated, and are functioning as expected on behalf of the enterprise. They'll also need to consider how the digital technologies are integrated with the physical technology stack that's spread across the geographies. And heck, often operating in those challenging environments over time. So monitoring and managing all of these physical assets, and in particular, the sensors and connectivity, is very important to the overall integrity of whatever the IoT solution is. And because without maintaining tight control over which sensors are in place, what they're responsible for doing, how they're performing, when and how they're degrading over time, then the data that they're generating may not be particularly useful to the end users. So to furnish an example, and apologize to folks, maybe not as exciting as the NFL, but one U.S. municipality is pursuing this strategy. The IT team responsible for operating these sensors identified a number of concerns after the sensors were put in place. And one is there's too many false positives and false negatives. Identical sensors are exhibiting different behavior. Field sensors were often offline, and then unanticipated environmental challenges would contribute to sensor calibration issues. So for the CIO responsible for managing this sensor-based flood prediction strategy, these issues suggested infrastructural level problems. Plus, while the sensors are relatively inexpensive to purchase, dispatching a team to examine the status of many of them, many of which are in places that are difficult to reach, even dangerous locations, will be cost prohibitive over time. So, was a sensor simply blocked by a blade of grass or a spider web that would eventually move and cease to present a problem? Or did the sensor exhibit a technical malfunction requiring repair or replacement? Without those better tools to monitor the sensors, human intervention would be the only way to find out, which is time consuming, resource intensive. So having an analytics-based kind of intelligent monitoring capability can provide a much more focused, effective, and just efficient way to monitor the health of the data generating physical assets that in the end imparts, supports as the foundational layer for a lot of these IoT enabled use cases.
It's funny, so much of this resonates with me because I come from a world where if you had sensors or servers or things like that go down, it wasn't you send a truck out, it was you send a helicopter out. And that's not a cost-effective way of managing these systems. So being able to have things like predictive maintenance, being able to manage all of these systems and like having that. And so one of the things that whenever I came to Red Hat, I kind of started looking at where we were thinking for edge and how all of those things were going. And I was like, so we have data center, we have near edge, we have far edge. Okay, near edge, data center, those are kind of similar. We have connectivity. But then when you get into those locations where you don't have connectivity, and how do you manage that? How do you actually know those sensors are actually doing the things that you want them to do when you're not able to see that they're doing the things you do? And a lot of this goes back to, and especially in industrials, is it comes down to life safety. Like how do you make sure that people are safe in their jobs? And so the previous session that we just watched was actually, it resonated a lot with me because all of the things that a lot of these systems do, watching for floods, watching for particulates in the air, watching for gases in the air, that all comes down to keeping people alive. And a lot of the customers that I've been working with lately are in the transportation. And of course, when you're talking airplanes and trains and things like that, again, it comes to their job number one is making sure people are safe.
Absolutely. One of the things I think all of you touched on is connectivity is king. That is one thing we have learned early on is if you don't have connectivity, and before in IT, it's you take the hardware, the software, you integrate it together and it'll work. Well, when we get into this space, that is not true. Even connected worker is not a simple solution. And so it's taking us to be focused on how do we do this? How do we really learn the environment of our clients and understand all the different ways that we can bring that connectivity to them? So let's go to the second topic. How did your company have to change its internal operations and its go-to-market strategies to accommodate the emerging edge IoT marketplace? Let's start with Bobby.
Great question. Yeah, so two main ways. One is how we view partnerships and the go-to-market aspect there. And then the second is how we focus and prioritize internally. So starting with the view of the partnerships. We are moving away from viewing partnerships and alliances as singular entities with go-to-market capabilities, and rather moving towards looking at them as deliberate configurations of a multi-party strategic partnership ecosystem that can help shape the entire market. So furthermore, looking at how this ecosystem can help us deliver not only the end-to-end solution in a repeatable way, but also various derivatives of the same solution in different environments. By different environments, I mean either different industries, different locations, heck, even different maturity states. And then just some high-level personas and types of kind of the partnerships that are typically necessary to be able to deliver an end-to-end offering. And there's service providers that have the deep domain knowledge into a particular area. Software partners that bring the enterprise-grade solutions to accelerate time to value. And that's a key part. It's key in building momentum in these initiatives and getting buy-in from for these IoT program initiatives, because early success can help fuel the wider investment from the organization. And then the last piece is just the hardware vendors to enable that end-to-end vision. So that's kind of a shift from a view of partnerships from that singular focus to, hey, let's focus on the ecosystem. The second part that I wanted to touch on was just our internal focus and prioritization. So not only in a particular capabilities, but having a ruthless focus on the types of themes and use cases that we want to pursue. So ensuring that we're using our company-wide aspirations as a beacon to rally around. So for example, we want to pave the way for the next 50 years of SaaS. And then determining where we want to play, how do we want to win in those areas, the capabilities, the IP that's needed for us to be able to execute there, and then the structures and operating models that need to be put in place. And what we choose to focus on, heck, this needs to evolve as we evaluate the scale of the opportunity and compare it to our ability to lead. We identify those themes and use cases to devote our resources to, and then we evaluate objectively as to what is working and what isn't working, and then use it to reallocate those resources as needed to enable us to be in the area of the highest potential, which is the intersection of the scale of the opportunity, the external market, and our internal ability to lead.
All of us are in the same spaces and thinking the same way. So everything you said was exactly the same as the things that we had to do, Bobby. So the things I think that we did kind of have to hone in on to, though, is also understanding that IoT people are not IT people necessarily, and being able to have the conversations in the same vernacular that they have, and being able to talk, when you go and talk to somebody in oil and gas about containers or like all these kind of new technologies, AI, ML, that's all just magic to them. They don't really understand a lot of that, especially where I came from, where you're talking about Modbus and sensors and things like that. That is not the same as your standard IT stack of how you get to things. So that was kind of our first thing. But then prioritization within the company of going from, all of us, I think, came from that world. Data center was king for so long, and now having to think outside of the data center and bringing it back to, and I love that, Kelly, that you brought up connected worker, because that was something that I was focused on in a previous life. And it was funny talking about connected worker to people, and they'd be like, yeah, connected worker. And it's like, connected worker needs connection and connectivity. So it all still ties back to, how do we connect? How do we get the data to all of those different places to have a connected worker? And then especially if you're in an industrial site that's all concrete and pipes and steel, it's really hard to have connectivity when you can't get wireless through a steel wall. So those are always really fun conversations.
Yeah, I agree with both Bobby and Chad. I think there's this more focus on the ecosystem, because there's a lot more innovators out there, and in terms of the value that they could bring to the table. And in terms of us, basically, we are in this business for a long time, in terms of the devices and how we've been working through different verticals. So if for us, it's always about every technology evolution, right? Looking at saying, hey, how does it actually help on the efficiency or safety or security of the frontline workers, right? How do we actually use every evolution to sort of push the needle, right, a little farther on the value, right? I'll give an example. Imagine, right, there is a retail retail worker, right, working on a night shift at 10 o'clock, stacking up a shelf in a warehouse, and he falls off, right? And he's working alone, right? There are devices that have become smarter right now, right, that could do sort of a drop detection, right? But just the drop detection alone will not help, right? You have to sort of marry that with rest of the things, right? In terms of, hey, is this the only person who's on work schedule right now, right? Or what else is happening around the store, right? Are there any other workers that are currently operating, right? Or which part of the store that the worker is working on, right? Depending on that intelligence, right, you would actually derive what is the next best action, right? So it's basically leveraging all the technology trends, right? Be it the smarter devices, right? Be it better connected or unconnected experiences, right? And the availability of software services, right? To sort of bring that intelligent experience together, right? And for us, it's pretty significant. So we were in the smarter devices side of things, right? On the smarter hardware, we're complementing on the smarter software, right? Not only ours, but also sort of leverage on the ecosystem. So we start pushing that value curve, right? Are we basically driving more efficiency, more value, again, to the end user? So that's how it's manifesting for us.
You guys came up with a lot of key topics. Partnerships and ecosystem. That's something we've seen where at times we have 20 OEMs and ISVs involved in a solution. And then you have some that are just a few, but we call it, we don't want to say customization because Bobby, you talked about, having, it's unique to each customer, but it's not like you have to rebuild the entire solution. There's just tweaking that has to go on, tailoring specific to them, because I've yet to find one single one of our customers that has everything identically the same. It just doesn't happen. But at least it's just tailoring and not customizing. And I think the other thing you guys touched on is kind of the OT IT cultures. If you look at, you're now having IT work with business units, lines of business, they have different cultures. I mean, that's one thing. We've actually done sessions with major corporations that spent an hour on, this is OT culture, this is IT culture. Sometimes they're oil and water, and you have to get them to really understand that each should be respected in their own right, because they have to work together. It just is what it is, and to be successful, we have to make sure that happens. So I'm going to go on to our third topic, which is a favorite, and I'm looking forward to the answers I'm going to get on this one. Is we've watched how most proof of concepts or proof of values done at the edge have struggled to go beyond just the initial implementation. Many of us refer to this as pilot purgatory. And what changes has your company made to their POC or POV or pilot approach to help clients move from initiative to a scale out? Let's start with Chad.
So I don't know that we've made a lot of different changes per se, because it's interesting coming from where I was doing a lot of those POCs and pilots and coming to somewhere where there's an open source company. So everything we do is out in the open. All the code's out there, people are doing this. So we've had to partner with obviously different spaces and get into different worlds there, but the POC purgatory hasn't really hit us as much because we've always been doing this. This is something that it's kind of like the culture that we live and breathe of how we do things. Is like we're constantly, sometimes, good or bad, we may have a bunch of different people working on kind of the same thing in a bunch of different angles, but we all come back pretty quickly on it because everything's out there in the open. We get feedback constantly. But then we did have to obviously change who we were partnering with, because we weren't necessarily partnering in the OT space at all. We were always partnering in the data center space. And then we also had to partner in more of the people doing predictive analytics, like the SaaS folks and that kind of space. And bringing in different partners into this, again, this ecosystem, it's so diverse. You have to be thinking about all the different parts and pieces and sensors and technologies, but being able to get out of that purgatory quickly and be able to state this is our MVP and this is what we want to get done is the most important part of this, versus the, oh, we're just going to keep trying till it works phase, which I think a lot of people get stuck in.
Nice.
Yeah, I think Bobby touched on this earlier. The environmental challenges, right? It's sometimes easy to probably put a value prop together, right, in terms of how you bring hardware and software together. But again, in each of these verticals, right, the environment challenges are very different. I mean, people work in noisy environments, people work in low light environments, people drop devices, right, and people don't charge devices, right. If you are assuming a lot of these things, right, in a real world setting, right, things sort of fall apart, right, and it's sometimes harder for somebody who's building things, right, on their own to get a good idea in terms of how this thing will be used at scale, right. It's like something that's working in somewhere, right, it'll probably hard to work in Canada in a colder environment where somebody's doing curbside pickup on with snow boots, right. If a device falls, right, you got to figure something out. So I think that adaptation to of a solution to an environment where the customers and these guys operating, I think that's really crucial. And the second one is even when we think about some of the solutions and all, right, you cannot keep adding more devices and all to some of the edge workers' belt, right? It's like they only can carry so many, right? So it's all to leverage what they've got, right, and sort of evolve from there. I think these are some of the things that we constantly look out for, right, to say, hey, how does it actually work in the real setting, right? Because once you are set on the value that you're going to build, right, you got to keep it incremental and sort of keep adapting to the reality out there. So
Bobby.
All right. Well, awesome response. I don't want to belabor the topic, so I'll highlight kind of 3 common pitfalls that I've seen, and then I wanted to dig into one of them because I think it's been something that's been mentioned by both Kelly, you, around the IT versus OT culture and how it can often be oil and water. And Chad, I loved your statement about how IoT people are not IT people. So we'll pause on that for a second, but the kind of 3 common pitfalls, not designing for scale. We'll touch on that in a moment. And this is less about the core technology components, more about the support, documentation, stability, just durability of the solution. The second one that I've seen is just not considering the deployment or management of various AI and ML models over time. Because hey, these things, they degrade over time. They need to be monitored. They need to be retrained, and they need to be deployed. The deployment of these models at scale is not a trivial matter. And then the last piece, kind of not having the right ecosystem in place. We've kind of touched on that. So I wanted to go back to the first piece. So not designing for scale, because I think what we've seen is that architecture will mimic organizational structure. And what I mean by that is IT organizations tend to view IoT use cases as originating in the cloud and expanding onto the edge, while OT folks tend to view it as originating on-prem and extending into the cloud. And one of the keys in designing for scale and to avoid this pile of purgatory is more about marrying the two to avoid these kind of religious and dogmatic types of discussions that I think we've seen experienced about where this data resides. So for example, OT players tend to come in with their own, in the industrial setting, in the manufacturing setting, kind of with their own factory floor proprietary systems, where the data goes back into their own cloud on the back end, but the client doesn't always get to own their data. So some clients don't like the platform as a service, as they prefer to own their data, or at least claim that they have their own internal data governance, which creates its own challenges, because not all clients are organized to be managing and supporting their own IoT solutions at scale. IT folks, and I was going to pick on them because hey, I also grew up as an IT individual. We want access to all the data. We become data greedy, and we don't often know exactly what to do with it. There's the philosophy that if we build it, they will come. So we grab onto every piece of data and spin it as a data warehouse or a data lake. But the reality, what comes out of it is more of a data swamp, where it's very difficult and expensive to get data out. So, a great acronym that I've heard is that we become DRIP, data rich and information poor, where we have all this data, but it sure as heck is difficult to use it. So the problem is, what does that end-to-end distributed architecture look like? What data is available? What data is useful? Where do we collect it? Where do we store it? How do we store it? And how do we do the compute locally, cloud, etc. So things tend to fall apart on the end-to-end. The OT folks think tactically, kind of piece by piece. The IT folks think they know better. We think we know better and want to all the data that is getting created. So we see two ways that this gets deployed. There's this top-down approach where if we build it, they'll come, give me all the data. Doesn't always work out well. And there's a bottom-up approach where there's a specific use case, and if done well, also a business rationale that goes with it. It's predictive maintenance on a specific ball-bearing machine to solve problem X that would generate return that's better. What tends to work best is when we marry the two, using the bottom-up approach to build momentum through initial success, and then start daisy chaining these use cases that are accretive, meaning they generate value on their own, but also have a synergistic effect that to drive towards the wider, more unified vision, which is often led by the IT group. Kind of cue the digital transformation.
Thank you, Bobby. And yeah, I agree with everything you guys have said. An environmental challenge is not built to scale. The thing I've seen, kind of being on the SI side of it, is hesitancy across so many of our clients and potential partners, or potential clients, I should say, of not wanting to be the first to step in there. And I know in some cases it's been, I don't know if it was what happened with cloud to begin with, or if it was something that has happened since then. COVID jumped in the middle of it. Some had to jump into IoT because you needed that connected worker, something there. But we've seen so many that are just kind of like, we've done so many POCs, they've not gone anywhere. We're just hesitant to really accept this as viable right now. And the IT, OT kind of struggle as well. The other thing that we've seen is a lot that didn't want to bite off a huge project, didn't want to say, oh, let's do this digital transformation. We call it crawl, walk, run. Step back, approach it in an agile aspect of, okay, let's get together in a room. Let's pretend we're building out software, but instead let's build out a solution or a specific use case. And then let's walk you through. And one of the key things we've seen into getting things to really go to where they'll scale out is to start with involving the frontline worker. Involve the person who actually is going to be using this technology, especially in IoT, and have them be in the room to contribute to, this is what this is how it's going to help me. I'm the one that's going to be using this. And what we've seen is, if you want to get adoption at the edge, involve them up front and first. Make them part of it, middle management, executives, etc. But put them in there because they're the ones that have to use it. They're the ones that can tell you how they're going to use it. And they can really help you hone in on what is the use case, what is the outcome that everybody wants to have in your company ecosystem to do this. And what's the ROI going to be? Because my belief is, from the get-go, every single one of these, you can have an ROI instantly, right? I mean, I'm not saying you'll instantly get your investment back. In some cases, you come pretty close, like in connected worker, where it could be a week or a month, simply because you cut out a long distance travel, flight, hotel, the time for a person to go somewhere where they could have just connected in. So a lot of different things going on here that I think I love the contribution of everybody and what you have to offer to help our community out there to understand the challenges we've had. We have a little time left, so I'm going to throw one more at you because we had a question that came up with Dr. Tom. And I think it's really key, and I think each of us can kind of approach it in a different manner. It's, how do you start a career in IoT? And this one I think is pretty broad because I'll start with, we've hired people from medical industry. I don't think there's one single industry that you can't have come into IoT, because you take their experiences, you bring them in, and they learn the technology. But I'm seeing diverse people come into IoT. And you don't have to have a college education, because I can tell you, I don't. I don't have a degree. I don't have a doctorate. I don't have a master. I don't have anything. I've been seat of my pants, which has been great. But there's also those aspects where you need to have a college degree. You need to have something beyond that. But for many, you can start right from the beginning and actually get into some really excellent occupations. So whoever would like to volunteer to start on that one, jump in.
I'll go, because I also do not have a degree, and I've been doing this a really, really long time. I mean, I think you really need to first follow your passion and know what you want to do, what you enjoy doing, because there's, like you said, it's every industry. So if you're really passionate about AI ML, start with something like Python, because at the end of the day, you're probably going to be doing a bunch of Python to do AI ML, and it is programming, but it's really fun programming. And I can say the first 10 years I was in IT, I had zero interest in programming. I just built servers because I loved hardware. But then I realized I didn't actually have to build those servers. I could use software to build the servers themselves. And this all applies back to IoT, because all of the things in IoT have to be built by themselves to be able to be disconnected, and it is literally all automated the way everything that is deployed, because again, connected worker, you don't have people there to do a lot of these things. So it comes down to a lot of these machines, which again scares a lot of the OT folks, because they're not computers and they don't trust IT. IT are the people that break things all the time, and they're the reasons that stuff go down. And everybody laughs because we've all been accused of the people that broke everything in OT. But also thinking about how you can collaborate and bringing in those people that are in the ground for some of these things, I think that was super important. So something you're passionate about and tying that back into all of these different technologies are out there. I mean, the world is wide open. There's tons of different opportunities out there. So it's really not how do you start, but when do you start?
True.
And so Chad, love that response. I wanted to provide kind of more of a tactical take on this as well. Just so LinkedIn is a powerful tool. So I think what's helpful is identify the individuals whose kind of types of careers you want to mimic or you want to explore, and see where they started and how they got there. And then look for mentors. And then from a mentorship standpoint, I think it's important to separate them into three buckets. Somebody who's maybe a year or two ahead of you. This way they can give you really, really tactical advice in terms of how to break into the industry. Somebody who's maybe like 5-ish years ahead of where you see your career being, because they can give you advice on what the next step is going to be in your career. And then somebody who's been in the career for 10, 20 plus years, who can give you kind of the overarching vision, kind of high level items. But having access to all three is useful, because you get the tactical advice on near term. Okay, here's who I reach out to, how I reach out, how I structure the discussion. Then there's the next question in terms of, okay, here's what the next step looks like, and then just the overall wider piece. But having informational interviews where it's okay to reach out to folks on LinkedIn. You can highlight. I think it's important to do your due diligence and highlight, hey, like really loved the panel. We spoke about this. This resonated with me. Would you be willing to chat about this? And this helps to kind of get a better idea of what it is you want to do. Start building your network organically this way. It's a lot easier to ask people for something if you have a relationship with them.
Awesome. Yeah, just to complement what Chad and Bobby are saying, from an engineering point of view, you see that the barrier to entry now is much lower than ever, right? You can get a quick hardware device, right, for about $100 or so, right? And you can get a cloud subscription, and you can start tinkering away, right? And across many verticals, right, you have these opportunities that sort of fall into sort of maybe on an XY scale, right? It's like, are you driving efficiency or are you driving safety, right? Pick a problem, right? Pick a vertical, pick a problem, even however small it is, right? And with that hardware, you can start tinkering, right? And with what Bobby is saying, right? Then from there, you could start linking into, who are the people, right, who could potentially help, and what ecosystems you could be part of, and I think this is where you put the intent to action. So this barrier to entry is much lower than what it has been for ages. So
yeah, great comments, guys. I mean, it goes from be passionate, which is an absolute, I think, mentors, excellent, and then easy access. We're working with community colleges that are now starting to put in programs specific to IoT technologies. They're learning on their own because they haven't exactly jumped in there yet, but I'm seeing a lot of the OEMs, the ISVs and our community that are jumping in there to say, we're here to help. And not only that is create that workforce, help develop that workforce that you can then get into your customers so that they can have that early jump start into what IoT is all about. So I want to thank this panel. This has been great. Thank you so much. And Kevin, we're going to hand off to you right on time.